The earliest memory I have of my mother is standing on a wooden stool in our kitchen, my small hands covered in flour as I tried to copy her graceful movements. I was 4, maybe 5, and to me that kitchen was a magical place where Mom could turn simple ingredients into pure joy. The morning sunlight would stream through our yellow gingham curtains, casting a golden glow that made everything feel warm and safe. Mom's recipe book was always there, its leather cover worn soft from years of use, pages wavy from absorbed steam and splattered with evidence of countless cooking adventures. A messy recipe book means a happy family, she'd always say, her brown eyes twinkling as she wiped vanilla extract from its pages. I still remember how she'd let me draw little stars next to our favorite recipes and how she'd write down every little discovery we made together. Maya made the pie crust extra flaky today. The secret is singing to the butter while you cut it in, she wrote when I was 7. Maya's first solo cookies, slightly burned but made with so much love they still taste perfect, appeared next to her chocolate chip cookie recipe when I was 9. Every page held not just instructions, but the story of our life together. As I grew older, the recipe book became our diary. Mom would sit at the kitchen counter late at night, adding notes about my first heartbreak. Nothing heals a broken heart like midnight brownie baking. My academic victories, celebration cake for my little genius's science fair win, and even my teenage rebellions. Maya came home past curfew, but stayed up to help me bake bread. Sometimes the best conversations happen at 2 a.m. The kitchen was where I learned everything important about life. Mom taught me that measuring cups were also tools for patience, that timing wasn't just about watching a clock but feeling when something was right, and that sometimes the best recipes needed to be adjusted to make them your own. Just like life, she'd say, tucking my hair behind my ear with flour-dusted fingers. I remember the spring I turned 16. Mom and I were planning my birthday party, deciding on a 3-tier cake that would impress all my friends. She was writing down the measurements when she suddenly dropped her pen. The doctor's appointment the next day confirmed what we'd feared: stage 4 pancreatic cancer. But even then, Mom's first thought was about our recipe book. "We have so many recipes left to try together," she said that night, her voice steady despite the devastating news. She pulled out the book and started writing with new urgency. I watched her hands, still strong and sure, filling the margins with more than just recipes. She was writing love letters, life advice, and pieces of herself onto those pages. That summer, we baked more than ever before. Even on her bad days, Mom would sit at the kitchen counter, directing me as I learned her most cherished recipes. "A little more vanilla," she'd say, or "listen to the sound of the mixer. It'll tell you when the batter's ready." She was teaching me more than just baking. She was teaching me how to keep her memory alive. What I didn't know then was that she was also leaving clues throughout the book, small warnings and protections woven between cake recipes and cookie instructions. Mom always said baking was about precision and intuition. Later, I would understand she meant life was too. I also didn't know that morning, as we measured flour for her famous snickerdoodles, that it would be our last recipe together. But Mom knew. She always knew more than she let on. The doctors gave Mom 6 months, but she was determined to make every moment count. Even as the chemotherapy took her strength, she refused to leave her spot at the kitchen counter. Her hands might have shaken as she wrote, but her handwriting remained as beautiful as ever, filling more pages with memories and messages. "You need to understand something, Maya," she said one evening as we sat surrounded by the comforting smell of baking bread. "This book isn't just about recipes anymore." She was writing in it more frequently now, often late into the night when she thought I was sleeping. I'd catch her crying sometimes, quickly wiping her tears before adding another note. Each recipe began to carry hidden meanings. Next to her chicken soup recipe, she wrote, "For when life feels cold, remember, warmth always returns." Her chocolate cake recipe now included, "Make this when you need to feel brave. Dark moments can still be sweet." Even her simple sugar cookie recipe held deeper wisdom. Sometimes the plainest things are the most honest. Trust your instincts about people, Maya. One night, I found her examining old photos and carefully taping them between recipe pages. "Mom, what are you doing?" I asked. She smiled mysteriously. "Creating a map of memories, sweetheart. Sometimes the best treasures need to be hidden to be kept safe." I didn't understand then how crucial those photos would become. As summer faded into autumn, Mom's strength began to fade too, but her determination only grew stronger. She started teaching me her special tricks: how to tell if a cake was done without using a toothpick, how to rescue a broken sauce, how to hear when bread was properly kneaded. "These aren't just baking secrets," she'd say, her voice growing softer but more urgent. "They're life lessons. Always trust your senses." Then came the day she added something different to the recipe book. Between her wedding cake recipe and holiday cookies, she slipped in newspaper clippings and what looked like legal documents. "Just some boring paperwork," she said when I asked, but her eyes held a warning I wouldn't understand until much later. Our last recipe together was her signature hot chocolate, the one she always made when I needed comforting. Her hands trembled so badly that I had to measure the ingredients, but she still insisted on writing the note beside it. "My dearest Maya," she wrote, "make this when the world feels dark. But remember, watch carefully who you share it with. Not everyone deserves your sweetness." That night, Mom asked me to make her a promise. "Keep this book safe," she whispered, her fingers tracing the worn leather cover. "There will be people who want it, not for the recipes, but for what they think they can take from our family. When that time comes, remember, every recipe has its secret ingredients and every story has its hidden truth." I promised, of course, but I was focused on holding back tears, not understanding the weight of her words. 3 days later, she slipped into a coma. The recipe book lay open on her bedside table, her last note unfinished. When she passed, the nurses had to pry it from my hands so they could take her away. What I didn't realize was that Mom's final gift wasn't just her recipes. It was a shield she'd crafted to protect us long after she was gone. And we would need that protection sooner than I could have imagined. The first month after Mom died, our kitchen stayed dark. The yellow curtains she loved so much hung limp and dusty, and her recipe book sat untouched on the counter where she'd left it. Dad started working longer hours, coming home only to stare at Mom's empty chair before retreating to his room. The silence in our house was deafening. I found myself wandering aimlessly, picking up things Mom had touched, her favorite mug, her gardening gloves, her reading glasses still perched on her bedside novel. Each item felt like a piece of her slipping away, but it was the missing items that first caught my attention. Mom's silver locket disappeared from her jewelry box. Then her antique brooch vanished from the dresser. Dad said he was putting special things in storage to keep them safe, but something about it felt wrong. One particularly bad night, when the emptiness felt too heavy to bear, I found myself in the kitchen at 3 a.m. The recipe book seemed to call to me. Opening it released the faintest scent of vanilla and cinnamon Mom's signature scent. Through tears, I started gathering ingredients for her midnight chocolate chip cookies. As I baked, something shifted. The familiar motions of measuring and mixing felt like Mom's arms around me. I could almost hear her voice. "A little more vanilla, sweetie. Vanilla makes everything better." For the first time since she died, I felt like I could breathe again. That night became a turning point. I started baking my way through Mom's recipes, one by one. Sometimes Dad would wander in, drawn by the familiar smells. He'd sit quietly, watching me work, occasionally sharing memories of Mom. "She used to burn everything when we first met," he said one evening, almost smiling. "But she never gave up until she got it right." But as I spent more time in the kitchen, I noticed more things going missing. Mom's cherished china teacups, passed down from her grandmother, her collection of vintage cooking implements, even her handwritten recipe cards started disappearing from their box. When I mentioned it to Dad, his eyes grew distant. "I can't look at her things right now, Maya. It hurts too much." Then the grief counselor suggested Dad join a support group. "It might help to meet others who understand," she said. That's how we met Victoria. Looking back, I should have paid more attention to what Mom wrote beside her chocolate cake recipe. Dark moments can still be sweet, but beware of those who only pretend to taste the bitterness. The first time Victoria came over, she admired Mom's recipe book. "Such a treasure," she said, her perfectly manicured fingers hovering over the pages. "These handwritten notes must be so precious to you." Something in her tone made me close the book quickly. That night, I moved it from the kitchen to my bedroom drawer. I didn't know then that this was just the beginning. Mom had left us so much more than recipes in that book. She'd left us warnings, clues, and protection. If only we'd known to look for them sooner. Victoria Adams was everything my mother wasn't. Where Mom had been soft cardigans and flour-dusted aprons, Victoria was crisp designer suits and perfectly manicured nails. She sat next to Dad at grief counseling, sharing stories about losing her husband to cancer just like we'd lost Mom. Her timing was perfect, always having a tissue ready when Dad's voice cracked, touching his arm gently when he struggled to speak. "It's so brave of you," she'd say, her voice honey-sweet. "Raising a teenage daughter alone." Her eyes would fill with practiced tears as she spoke about her own loss. "Thomas and I never had children. Perhaps that was a blessing, given how suddenly he was taken from me. I researched Thomas Adams later, but found nothing. No obituary, no social media presence, no trace of his existence. When I mentioned this to Dad, he brushed it off. "Not everyone lives their life online, Maya," he said, but there was an edge to his voice I'd never heard before. Victoria integrated herself into our lives with surgical precision. First, it was bringing Dad coffee after group sessions, then offering to help organize Mom's things to ease his burden. She'd show up with gourmet takeout when Dad worked late, always making sure to pack extra for me. "We girls need to stick together," she'd say with a wink that never quite reached her eyes. The changes started small. Victoria suggested updating the living room to help us move forward. Mom's comfortable old armchair disappeared, replaced by a sleek modern piece. The family photos on the walls gave way to abstract art. "Your mother would want you to heal," she'd tell Dad whenever he hesitated. "Holding on to everything isn't healthy." But it was the day she offered to help in the kitchen that really set off alarm bells. She opened Mom's recipe book without asking, her red nails trailing across Mom's handwriting. "These old recipes are so quaint," she said. "But perhaps it's time for some new traditions?" The look in her eyes when she saw Mom's notes made my skin crawl. Dad proposed 3 months after meeting her. "Victoria makes me feel alive again," he told me, but his smile seemed forced. The wedding was rushed. A small ceremony with none of our family present. Victoria claimed she wanted it intimate, but I noticed how she avoided questions about her own relatives. The night before the wedding, I found Dad in the kitchen staring at Mom's recipe book. "Your mother was an amazing woman," he whispered. For a moment, I saw doubt in his eyes. But then Victoria called from upstairs, and the moment was gone. That's when I remembered Mom's note beside her wedding cake recipe. Marriage is like baking. The ingredients must be pure, the intentions honest, and the timing just right. Watch for those who try to rush the process. They usually have something to hide. If only we'd paid attention to Mom's warnings sooner. Because the woman who became my stepmother wasn't just hiding something. She was hiding everything. The real Victoria emerged 2 weeks after the wedding. It started with a phone call I wasn't supposed to hear. It was past midnight, and I'd gone down to the kitchen for water when I caught her voice from the back porch. She was speaking in a tone I'd never heard before, sharp, businesslike, nothing like her usual sugary sweetness. "The old lady's jewelry alone covered our expenses," she was saying. "But this house? You should see the artifacts they've got hidden away. The daughter's going to be a problem, though. Too observant, just like her mother." My hands shook as I recorded the conversation on my phone, but when I played it for Dad the next morning, the recording was gone, deleted alongside several photos of Mom's missing items I'd documented. That's when I started keeping a second phone hidden in my closet. Victoria's campaign to erase Mom accelerated. She rearranged the entire house while Dad was at work, claiming she was decluttering. Mom's books disappeared from the shelves. Her garden tools vanished from the shed. Even her roses were dug up, replaced with modern landscaping that Victoria claimed was more maintainable. "Where are Mom's things?" I demanded one afternoon. Victoria's smile never wavered, but her eyes turned cold. "Maya, darling," she said, placing her hand on my shoulder with perfectly calculated concern, "this obsession with your mother's belongings isn't healthy. I've been talking to your father about getting you some professional help." That night, I overheard her talking to Dad. "I'm worried about her, James," she said, her voice trembling. "These accusations, this hostility, it's not normal. Perhaps she needs more intensive therapy?" Dad looked uncertain, caught between his new wife and his daughter. But Victoria's mask really slipped the day I caught her in Mom's old study. She was on the phone again, examining Mom's antique desk. "The provenance is perfect," she was saying. "Original Victorian with documentation. Should fetch at least 20,000. She saw me in the doorway, and her face changed, just for a second, into something predatory. Then the sweet stepmother mask slipped back into place. "Maya, I was just discussing donating some of these old pieces to charity. Your mother would have wanted to help others, don't you think?" That's when I started watching her more carefully. I noticed how she always wore gloves when handling Mom's things, how she took photos of every valuable item in the house when she thought no one was looking, how she made excuses to check Dad's financial documents. Then came the morning I found my drawer empty, Mom's recipe book gone. Victoria appeared in my doorway holding a cup of tea. "Looking for something?" she asked, and this time she didn't bother hiding the smugness in her voice. "Where is it?" I demanded. "Oh, that old thing." She sipped her tea delicately. "I was just organizing the kitchen, though I did notice some interesting papers tucked between those recipes. Your mother was quite thorough in her record keeping, wasn't she?" That's when I realized Mom hadn't just left us recipes in that book. She'd left us evidence, and Victoria had just confirmed she knew exactly what she was looking for. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I pulled out my laptop and started digging. Victoria Adams. The name sounded fake even as I typed it. I started with basic social media searches, but something Mom wrote in the recipe book kept nagging at me. When a cake doesn't rise, check your ingredients one by one. So I broke down everything I knew about Victoria: the grieving widow story, the husband named Thomas, the charity work she claimed to do. One by one, each detail crumbled under scrutiny. No death certificate for Thomas Adams, no record of their marriage, no trace of her supposed charity foundation. My best friend Jenny's father worked at the local newspaper. When I showed him Victoria's photo, his eyes widened. "I've seen her before," he said, pulling up old archives, "but not as Victoria Adams." The first article was from 3 years ago. Local businessman found dead, young wife inherits estate. The photo showed Victoria, then calling herself Sarah Collins, accepting condolences at a funeral. 6 months later, another article: widow donates husband's art collection. Only the art collection had vanished, along with Sarah Collins. Jenny helped me create a timeline: different cities, different names, but always the same pattern. She targeted wealthy widowers, married them quickly, and disappeared with their valuables within a year. Sometimes she cleaned out their bank accounts too. The police had investigated, but she was always gone before they could catch her. But Mom had known. Those newspaper clippings she'd hidden in the recipe book weren't random. They were a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to Victoria's past crimes. "Always check your sources," Mom had written next to her lemon bar recipe. "Some things that look sweet on the surface can be sour underneath." I found one of Victoria's previous stepdaughters on social media. Rachel Morgan agreed to meet me at a coffee shop. "Let me guess," she said before I could explain. "She's already started moving things into storage units?" Rachel's story matched the pattern perfectly. Her father, a successful lawyer, had married Victoria, then calling herself Rebecca Thompson, 8 months after his wife's death. Family heirlooms started disappearing. When Rachel raised concerns, Victoria convinced her father that grief was making his daughter unstable. "Check the storage facilities on the edge of town," Rachel advised. "She always rents units under different names, and be careful, she gets dangerous when cornered." That afternoon, I followed Victoria. She led me straight to a storage facility. Through the office window, I watched her sign paperwork as Margaret Wilson. The manager handed her a key, and she drove to Unit 247. I waited until she left before approaching the office. The manager recognized me from the neighborhood. "Your stepmom's so thoughtful," he said, "storing all your mom's things to surprise you later." My heart raced. "Actually, I'm helping her organize," I lied, "but I forgot which unit number she gave me." 247, he said cheerfully. "Need the spare key?" Inside Unit 247, my hands trembled as I turned on the light. Boxes lined the walls, each labeled meticulously: Jenkins Estate, Morton Collection, Williams Jewelry. And there, on a shelf at eye level, sat Mom's recipe book. But before I could grab it, the unit door slammed shut behind me. "My curious little stepdaughter," Victoria's voice rang out in the darkness. "You're just like your mother, too clever for your own good." The storage unit felt like a tomb in the darkness. I heard Victoria's heels clicking as she moved closer. "You know," she said, her voice eerily calm, "your mother almost ruined everything. All those little notes and clippings she left behind. She was quite the amateur detective." My hand clutched my phone in my pocket, already recording. A thin beam of light filtered through the unit's small window, illuminating Mom's recipe book on the shelf. Victoria's silhouette blocked the door. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice?" she continued. "A grieving teenager suddenly investigating storage units, following me around town? You're not as subtle as you think, Maya." "How many others?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. How many families have you stolen from? Victoria laughed, a cold, hollow sound, nothing like her usual practiced giggle. Stolen? Oh, sweetheart, they gave everything to me willingly, just like your father did when he signed those new life insurance papers last week. My blood ran cold. Mom's warning beside her bread recipe suddenly made sense. Watch the ones who try to rush the rising. They're usually hiding something that won't survive the heat. The policy wouldn't pay out if he knew about your other husbands, I said. The ones who mysteriously died after increasing their life insurance. The silence that followed was deafening. Then I heard a metallic click that made my heart stop. Smart girl, Victoria said. Just like your mother, and that's becoming a real problem. She stepped into the thin beam of light. The small revolver in her hand looked almost delicate, like her manicured nails. The recipe book, she demanded. Where are the documents your mother hid inside it? You mean the evidence? I took a step backward. The newspaper clippings? The police reports? The photos of you with your other husbands? All of it, she snarled. Now. That's when I heard another sound. Footsteps in the hallway. Victoria didn't notice, too focused on me and the book. It's funny, I said, raising my voice slightly. Mom wrote something about this exact situation. What are you talking about? Next to her chocolate cake recipe. Sometimes the darkest moments are right before things get better. The storage unit door flew open. Light flooded in, momentarily blinding us both. Police, drop the weapon! Victoria spun around, the gun still pointed at me. I saw Dad standing behind the officers, his face ashen. Jenny was there too, her phone still recording everything. James! Victoria's voice shifted instantly to her sweet stepmother tone. This isn't what it looks like. Maya's been. Save it, Dad's voice cracked. We heard everything. The insurance policy, the other husbands, all of it. As the officers moved in, Victoria made one last desperate move. She lunged for Mom's recipe book, probably hoping to destroy the evidence, but I was faster. I grabbed it and held it close, feeling its familiar leather cover against my chest. Victoria's perfect mask finally shattered completely. As the police handcuffed her, she started laughing, a high, unhinged sound. She's been dead for months, she spat. But somehow that meddling baker still managed to ruin everything. Looking down at Mom's recipe book, I smiled through my tears. Mom always said the best recipes take time to perfect. The officers led Victoria away as I opened the book to Mom's last note. Remember, my brave girl, love is the strongest ingredient of all, and love always protects its own. The days following Victoria's arrest were a blur of police statements and revelations. Our living room became command central for the investigation, with detectives spreading out photos and documents across Mom's old coffee table, the one Victoria had tried to sell just weeks before. 7 identities confirmed so far, Detective Martinez explained, laying out driver's licenses with Victoria's face but different names. Sarah Collins, Rebecca Thompson, Margaret Wilson. She's been running this scheme for over a decade. The storage unit revealed the true scope of her operation. Not just our family heirlooms, but treasures from at least 6 other families. Antique jewelry, rare books, vintage furniture, each item carefully cataloged and ready to be sold. Dad looked sick when they showed him the insurance policies she'd had him sign, all part of her plan to make his accidental death look legitimate. She was going to... He couldn't even finish the sentence. That night, I found him sitting in Mom's old spot in the kitchen, holding her recipe book like a lifeline. Your mother tried to warn us, he whispered. All those notes, those clippings she left. She was protecting us even after she was gone. The investigation uncovered more than just Victoria's crimes. Two of her previous husbands hadn't died of natural causes as reported. Cold cases were being reopened. Detective Martinez said they were looking at potential murder charges. Rachel Morgan and other previous stepchildren came forward with their stories. We sat together in support groups, sharing eerily similar tales of missing heirlooms and manipulated parents. She almost convinced my father I was mentally unstable, Rachel said, squeezing my hand. If your mother hadn't left those breadcrumbs. Mom's recipe book became key evidence. Between recipes for pound cake and pie crust, she'd woven together the case against Victoria. News clippings about mysterious deaths, photos from social events showing Victoria with different husbands, bank records showing suspicious transfers. Mom had tracked it all during her final months. Rose was a regular detective, Detective Martinez said admiringly, carefully turning the book's pages. She must have started investigating as soon as she spotted Victoria at that grief counseling group. One of Mom's last notes finally made sense. To whoever finds these pages, some recipes are meant to expose poison, not just create sweetness. She'd known someone like Victoria might come along, and she'd prepared for it. The hardest part was watching Dad struggle with his guilt. I should have seen it, he kept saying. I should have trusted your instincts, Maya, should have paid attention to what your mother left us. One evening, as we sorted through the returned family heirlooms, I found him crying over Mom's old mixing bowls. She's still saving us, he said softly. Even now, Rose is still protecting her family. The recipe book had one more surprise for us. Hidden in a false cover, we found a letter Mom had written to Dad. My dearest James, if you're reading this, it means our Maya was brave enough to uncover the truth. Don't blame yourself for being vulnerable. Blame the ones who prey on grief. Just remember, our love story was real, and real love leaves a legacy of truth, not lies. 6 months after Victoria's arrest, our house slowly began to feel like home again. We repainted the kitchen that soft yellow Mom had always loved, hung the old family photos back on the walls, and brought her recipes back to life. Each weekend, Dad and I would pick a recipe from Mom's book and spend the day baking together, healing through flour, sugar, and shared memories. I remember this one, Dad said one Sunday, pointing to a coffee cake recipe. Your mom made this the morning I got laid off from my first job, said sweet things help bitter moments pass. His hands shook less now when he talked about her. We discovered more of Mom's hidden messages as we cooked our way through the book. Between recipes, she'd tucked away little time capsules of our family's life. A photo of my first steps hidden in the pancake recipe, the ticket stub from Dad's and her first date pressed between pages of her lasagna instructions. Each discovery felt like a hug from her. The other families Victoria had stolen from became part of our extended circle. We hosted monthly dinners where everyone brought dishes made from their own family recipes. Rachel Morgan brought her mother's pierogi. The Jenkins family shared their grandmother's secret barbecue sauce. Together, we rebuilt what Victoria had tried to destroy. Your mom would have loved this, Mrs. Jenkins said one evening, watching all of us gathered around our dining table. She turned a story of theft into one of community. The police investigation continued to uncover Victoria's web of deception. They found storage units in 3 other states, each filled with stolen family treasures. As items were returned to their rightful owners, we received letters of gratitude. Thank you for helping us get our grandmother's jewelry back. Your mother's courage brought our family's heritage home. Dad started attending a different grief support group, a legitimate one this time. Slowly, he learned to trust again. Your mother always said there's no recipe for healing, he told me one night. You just have to keep adding love until it feels right. One evening, as we made Mom's signature chocolate chip cookies, Dad pulled out an old photo album we thought Victoria had sold. Found it hidden in the attic, he explained. Your mom wrote something on the back of every photo, like she was leaving us a trail of memories to follow home. The last photo in the album was of Mom and me in the kitchen, flour in our hair, laughing as we tried to perfect her pie crust. On the back, in her familiar handwriting, my dearest ones, remember that the best recipes aren't just about the ingredients, they're about the love you stir into them. And love, once baked into your heart, can never truly be stolen. That night, the house smelled like cookies and hope. As Dad and I sat in the kitchen, sharing warm cookies and cold milk, I felt Mom's presence stronger than ever. She'd given us more than just recipes. She'd given us a way back to each other, a path through the darkness, and the strength to reclaim our home.